week we are going to be focusing on indirect or reported speech, which will be really useful to use in your newspaper reports. Indirect or reported speech is where you use a quote from someone, but you don't directly quote them. You just express what they say using the main information. In a previous home learning video, we talked about direct speech. Here is an example. Shaking with fear, Annabelle Lynn whispered, "It was so scary, all of the lights went dark and then I heard a crash from the jewellery shop." We can tell that this is direct speech because they have used inverted commas and they have quoted her directly. This is exactly what she said. If we change this to indirect speech, it becomes a little bit different. We are still talking about what she is saying, but it is not directly from her mouth. We have slightly changed it and it has become reported, which means we are saying it after it has been said. It now reads, "Shaking with fear, Annabelle Lynn whispered that it was so scary, all of the lights went dark and she heard a crash from the jewellery shop." You can see that I have highlighted part of my indirect speech in red. This is because these are the key things you need to consider when changing to indirect speech. I am no longer directly quoting her, so I won't be using I. And I've also changed it to she instead, because she has told me this. We use the keyword that quite a lot in indirect speech, because you are retelling a conversation that you have already had. Here are some more good examples of indirect speech. These link to our writing in English that we will be doing this week. The unique, nervous wizard believed that he had done something wrong. Jacob, an aspiring baker, was adamant that he had never meant to pick up the wrong suitcase. Local residents cried that they had never seen such devastation in their beautiful city. This week we have moved on to reminding ourselves about fractions, and specifically something we have been doing in Year 4 is adding fractions with the same denominator. Here I have two fractions. They have similarities and they have differences. You can clearly see that both fractions have the same denominator. That's the number at the bottom. They both have 8 parts in the whole of them. However, they have different numerators. This is the number at the top of the fraction. One of the fractions has 5 and one of the fractions has 2. 5/8 is therefore bigger than 2/8 because it has more parts out of the whole. We are now going to try and add these fractions together. We know that 5/8 is bigger than 2/8, but I wonder what happens when you add them. I've put some reminders on the right-hand side of things you need to remember when adding fractions. The numerators need to be added together. So you are going to add 5 and 2, which would make 7. However, unlike usually when you add numbers, when you add fractions and they have the same denominator, that denominator stays the same. This is because the whole is still 8. The whole will not become 16 parts, it will stay as 8 parts. So we will now just have more parts out of 8 parts. As you can see, I followed the steps and I now have an answer. 5/8 add 2/8 is 7/8. I now have 7 parts out of 8 parts altogether. Here are a couple more examples of adding fractions with the same denominator. 4/5 add 1/5. I add the numerators together and that gives me 5. I keep my denominator the same, which stays as 5. My answer is 5/5. Now, because I have all of my parts, I could also write this in a different way. If your numerator and denominator are the same, that means that you have a whole, you have all of the parts that you need. So I could write 5/5, or I could write 1 or 1 whole. My second example is 5/7 add 1/7. I add my numerators together. 5 add 1 is 6. My denominator stays the same. So my answer is 6/7.